Alright, so what's up everybody? Today I was doing some two-up riding with my wife, and I done something that I thought would be worthwhile to make a quick video about. So maybe like a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, I put out a little tip on counter steering, and tried my best to kind of explain it how I understand it, and then also not only explain how it works, but kind of how to apply it. So anyway, while we were riding today, me and my wife, I was on a road I hadn't been on in a while, and I knew there was a curve coming, but I let it kind of sneak up on me, and I overshot, or was going to overshoot the turn. Was going not significantly too fast to make it, but too fast to make it. And so that kind of jogged my mind a little bit, and I was like, well, on the way home, I'm going to talk about it. So here we are. So if you ask any sport bike riders, especially sport bike racers, there's a technique, and they just refer to it. It may have another name and whatnot, but it's just dragging the rear brake. So normally when you come into a turn, you set up so that you pick your line, a good apex in mind, and you do all your braking before the turn. And from a traction standpoint and a behavior standpoint from the bike, you want a smooth acceleration through the apex of the turn, out of the turn, and then as you're standing the bike up, you go from having gently rolled onto the throttle, and the more vertical your bike gets coming out of the turn, you can really start to twist on it. So if you overshoot a curve, that is when I personally only use the rear brake to slow down. So if you're still upright and you've already started braking when you realize that you may overshoot a curve, then you can use some front brake. But when it comes time to turn, like it's now or never, we're turning, you've got to get off the front brake. Now you can still drag the rear, and that's why it's called dragging the rear. You ain't on it hard. You're on it hard enough to do something, but you cannot be on it hard enough to lock it up. So I'm going to show a clip here from my ride earlier where I almost overshot this curve. Okay, it's worth mentioning that I expected this turn to be about 200 feet further up the road than it was. So I'm going into this left-hand turn, grabbing a little front brake, and then right about here I realized that I do not have 200 feet. So come off the front brake, I'm still dragging the rear brake. I actually downshift twice during that time. I come off the rear brake as I start applying throttle right here, and then come up out of the turn and just continue on, not running this next turn wide, properly setting it up. And it doesn't look bad because I never even get close to the yellow line. I was going slow enough that I would have never overshot the entire turn, but I would have overshot the yellow line had I not drugged the rear brake, downshifted twice, and kept my calm. So as you can see in the video, it don't look that crazy. But as soon as I realized that I was going too fast to maintain that speed and make the curve, I immediately drug on the rear brake. And I was already on the brakes, but when it come time to turn, I got off the front brake. I counter steered the bike, and no jerk reaction, just stayed calm, smooth. But I never, something you would normally not do is I never came off the rear brake completely until I had already started applying throttle, and then I come off the rear brake. So there's no real way for you to visually see this happen in the video, but that's what I did. And the reason I mentioned the sport bike community is that's actually a technique. As much as you never want to choose a line through a curve, start accelerating, and then have to chop the throttle, because when your bike's in a curve, I mean, there's a lot of things going on with the geometry and the suspension, and when you're in a curve and you start accelerating, as you accelerate, your suspension extends, it uncompresses. Watch a bike on the dyno, somebody's dynoing it, and as they just go up through the RPMs, you gently see the seat rise up until they're banging off the rev limiter and it's full. So it's all the way out. Same thing happens when you're leaned over going through a curve and you start accelerating. Now on a bike with not much horsepower, it don't happen fast, but it happens. So the last thing you ever want to do in a curve is have to stop that and tap the brakes. As soon as you do, effectively you lose ground clearance, so depending on how far you're leaned over, your peg could all of a sudden hit, things like that. But a lot of the sport bike guys will actually never come off their rear brake completely until they've already made the apex of the corner and started accelerating. They'll twist on their throttle and still be dragging the rear brake and then come off the rear brake. And it's a lot faster to, if you realize you're going to shoot the turn long or wide, to just tap a little more back brake when you're already got it applied and keep the throttle rolled, just steady throttle position, than it is to completely chop the throttle and then maybe smack the rear brake and then maybe accelerate again. So it's just something to think about, not something I necessarily recommend you going out and practicing purposely overshooting turns or anything, but do some more research on it. It's maybe something that you've never heard of. I hadn't heard of it until that long ago, and I'd always kind of done it just naturally, but over time realized that to get through that turn successfully, I needed to not touch the front brake, and so that only left the back brake open. So yeah, check it out, see what you think. Catch y'all next time.